I spent my hardest, poorest years driven by her whisper that she truly loved me. Yet the moment I could finally afford the wedding of her dreams, she humiliated me in front of everyone, calling me pathetic. She even took a box cutter to the wedding dress I'd spent countless sleepless nights sewing by hand, shredding it to ribbons while laughing that since the ring and the dress were gone, the engagement should be trashed too. I stood there staring at the pile of rags, watching our entire history being torn apart by her own hands. I heard later that she spent nights hunched over, trying to stitch that same dress back together. Every clumsy, seamless, silent apology, eventually showing up at my door drenched in the rain to beg for another chance. But as I looked at her through the door, I realized I didn't even have the energy to hate her anymore. Some things in this world can't just be picked up once you throw them away, because while a dress can be patched, a broken heart stays broken. I had been with the Sterling family's heiress for 5 years, but a car crash wiped her memory just a day before our engagement. I stayed by her side every second, praying she would remember the life we built together. My world shattered when I accidentally overheard her on a call with her first love, the one she could never let go of. "I'm just faking the amnesia," she had whispered into the phone. "I just don't want to go through with the wedding." By the time I finally gave up and erased myself from her life, she was the one standing on my porch in a white gown. She was sobbing my name. "Lucas, please, can you marry me after all?" My heart nearly stopped the moment Olivia Sterling opened her eyes, and I stood up so fast I was trembling. "Olivia, you're back," I whispered. The specialist in Chicago had warned me she might stay in a coma forever, so I hadn't slept in days, terrified I'd miss the second she came back to me. Seeing her awake felt like a miracle that left me choked up and speechless. I reached out and took her hand in mine, asking her if she was in pain or if she needed anything. She just looked at me with cold, empty eyes and asked, "Who are you?" "I don't know who you are." Olivia's icy words cut me off before I could even finish my sentence. I stood there, frozen and unable to process what she'd just said, trying to force a smile despite the cold pit in my stomach. "Olivia, that's not funny," I said, my voice shaking. "It's me, Lucas. I'm your fiancé." A look of pure confusion and disbelief flashed across her face as she ripped her hand away from mine. She looked at me with genuine anger and told me to stop lying, because her fiancé was Ryan Miller. The second she said that name, I felt the blood drain from my face. Ryan Miller was a name I hadn't heard in years, a ghost from her past. He was the man the Sterling family had originally chosen for her back when they were just children. They grew up together in the same elite circles of Chicago, and everyone used to say they were the perfect power couple. Everyone thought they would eventually marry, but the Miller family lost everything in a massive bankruptcy almost overnight. The Sterlings wasted no time in calling off the engagement, leaving the two of them separated. I looked into Olivia's freezing stare, my eyes landing desperately on the engagement ring still on her finger. I tried to find a spark of recognition in her eyes, pointing to the jewelry on her hand. "No, Olivia, look, we're together now," I said, holding her hand so the diamond would catch the light. I started stammering, tried to explain our history, but she just looked more and more annoyed. She didn't even hesitate before she yanked the ring off and threw it across the room. She looked me dead in the eye and told me that whoever I was, I needed to leave because the only person she wanted was Ryan Miller. The neurologist later explained that the trauma from the crash had caused severe retrograde amnesia. That was the 5th time she'd kicked me out of her hospital room, and I could still hear her screaming for me to stay away through the closed door. Her friend was standing around her bed, looking completely baffled by her behavior. It was like she had become a different person overnight. It was devastating. She remembered every single person in her life except for me, and she treated me with nothing but contempt. Sarah stepped out into the hallway and put a hand on my shoulder, telling me not to take it personally. She reminded me that brain injuries can change a person's personality and that Olivia wasn't herself. She only forgot that I exist, I said, my heart heavy as I tried to force a reassuring smile. I told Sarah that her health was the only thing that mattered to me. Sarah looked like she wanted to say something else, hesitating for a long moment before she finally found the words. Maybe we should call Ryan Miller Lucas, she suggested tentatively. She quickly added that it wasn't personal, but the doctors thought seeing a familiar face from her current memory might keep her calm. She was stammering, clearly realizing how messed up it was to ask the fiancé to call the ex. I didn't say a word, just turned to look through the observation window at Olivia. She looked so fragile wrapped in bandages, her eyes red from crying as she demanded to see Ryan. The usual sterling pride was gone, replaced by a desperate, heartbreaking vulnerability. It took a long time before I could force a reply through my hoarse throat, telling Sarah I'd make the call. While I walked back into the room, Olivia was strangely still. She studied me from head to toe before asking, in a quiet voice, why on earth she would ever agree to marry someone like me. I wanted to tell her it was because we were in love, because she had been the one to chase me, but the words died in my throat. My knuckles were white from how hard I was gripping the bed rail. Right then, the door swung open and a man walked in, and Olivia's entire face transformed. "Ryan, you came," she cried out. Ryan Miller didn't waste any time getting there, and he practically shoved me out of the way to get to her side. He looked at her with such feigned tenderness, asking about her injuries. Olivia pouted like a child, complaining about how much she hurt and how some bad man had been bothering her constantly. It wasn't hard to guess who she was talking about. I swallowed the bile in my throat and stepped back, but Ryan wasn't satisfied with just being there. He stepped into my personal space, looking down his nose at me, and told me to take the hint and get lost since Olivia clearly didn't want me around. He sounded so entitled that it made my blood boil, and I reminded him that I was the one wearing the title of fiancé. Olivia didn't even let me finish before she looked up at me with pure venom in her eyes. She smirked and told me to just call the whole thing off because she'd never officially recognized me as her fiancé anyway. That was the final blow to my sanity. I stared at her, my mind going completely blank for a few seconds as I started to wonder if this was all some sick act. I was shaking so hard I could barely stand, begging her with a broken voice not to treat me this way. The way she looked at me, like I was something she'd stepped on in the street, was destroying me. I was practically on my knees, begging her to at least try not to hate me so much. She just tilted her head, looked me over with a cruel smile, and told me that just the sight of me made her want to vomit. Ryan practically threw me out of the room, and I had to lean against the hospital wall as the sound of their laughter drifted through the door. My chest felt like it was being crushed by a physical weight. I never imagined those words would come from her lips, especially considering everything we'd survived together. Back when she first defied the Sterlings to be with me, we were living in a cramped, drafty apartment in a bad part of town. She was a girl who had never known a day of want, yet she took a secret job behind my back. She worked double shifts just to surprise me with the watch I've been eyeing for months. The watch wasn't a luxury brand, but to us, it was a fortune. I couldn't fathom how she'd endured those freezing Chicago winds to save up every penny. When I saw her hands, raw and cracked from the cold, I broke down in tears, but she just gave me that beautiful smile and told me she did it because she truly loved me. It was impossible to reconcile that girl with the cold stranger telling me she wanted to throw up at the sight of me. She didn't even bother telling me when she left the hospital. I only found out when I saw her post on Facebook showing off a new ring Ryan had bought her and asking all her friends if they liked it. The photo featured her hand with the diamond sitting prominently on her finger for everyone to see. I set my phone down, feeling completely numb. I could still see the image of her throwing our engagement ring onto the hospital floor like it was trash. I couldn't wrap my head around how memory loss could turn a person's heart so cold. A dark thought crept in. Maybe she never loved me at all, and it was all in my head. I tried to shake it off, telling myself it was just the trauma talking and that I just needed to be patient. I was prepared to wait a lifetime for her to remember us. While I walked into our apartment, I was surprised to find her standing in the living room. Her expression immediately turned sour, and she started screaming at me, calling me a pathetic loser for using dirty tricks to keep her around. I stood there, bewildered by the sudden attack, and tried to keep my voice calm as I asked her what she was talking about. She glared at me with pure hatred and threw a pillow at my head, accusing me of snitching to her parents to keep her away from Ryan. She told me I was sick for keeping her trapped in our own home. I realized then that the Sterlings were clearly pulling the strings to keep her away from the Miller boy. I tried to defend myself, telling her I had nothing to do with it, but she didn't want to hear it. She threatened me, telling me that if I ever interfered again, she would make my life a living hell. She slammed the front door so hard the frames rattled. Later that night, she stumbled back home smelling like a bar, draped over Ryan Miller's shoulder. He carried her in with a smug look on his face, glancing dismissively at the bowl of soup I'd made for her that was now sitting cold on the table. Ryan let out a mocking laugh, telling me Olivia was right about me being a pathetic lapdog. He stepped closer, his eyes dripping with disdain, and told me he'd be staying in a master bedroom with her tonight. I stood up, my blood boiling, and told him if he even tried to step foot in that room, he'd regret it. I lost it and lunged at him, grabbing his collar and landing a solid punch right across his jaw for trying to take advantage of her. He stumbled back with a groan, but before I could do anything else, I heard Olivia scream my name from the sofa. She sounded absolutely furious. She had pulled herself up and was shaking with rage. Before I could say a word, she swung her hand and slapped me so hard my ears rang. I stood there in shock, clutching my stinging cheek, feeling a level of betrayal that I couldn't even put into words. "Olivia," I whispered, searching her face for even a glimmer of the woman who used to love me. There was nothing but pure, unadulterated loathing. She asked me who the hell I thought I was hitting Ryan, and told me that the slap was her way of settling the score for him. I couldn't even find my voice as she tenderly helped Ryan up from the floor. Her final words to me were that she wished I would just drop dead so she wouldn't have to look at me anymore. They went upstairs together, and I sat in the silence of the living room, every sound of their proximity echoing through the house like a knife. I sat on the sofa in the dark, my heart in pieces, whispering that she was going to regret this. I retreated to the study, trying to hold back my tears as I looked at the wedding dress laid out on the table. Olivia had once told me she wanted something unique for our big day, something no other girl in Chicago would have. I'd spent months designing it myself, taking classes and obsessing over every single stitch to make it perfect for her. I touched the small OL, initials I'd embroidered near the neckline, and the room finally dissolved into a blur of tears. We were so close to the finish line, just one step away from forever. It used to be me she fought for, me she protected. Despite everything, I was in the kitchen early the next morning, making her favorite remedy for hangovers. I knew she'd be in pain, and I'd gone to great lengths to get the ingredients for the specific tonic that always made her feel better. I waited for hours, but she never appeared. When I eventually went upstairs, I found her in the study, just standing there and staring at the dress. Her hair hid her face, and for a fleeting second, I allowed myself to hope that she was finally starting to remember our life together. I tried to keep the hope out of my voice as I asked if she was okay or if her head was bothering her. She just looked at me with a blank stare and asked what the hell the dress was. I swallowed hard and explained that it was the gown I designed for her, the one she'd asked for when we were planning our future. My voice was shaking as I begged her to just try and remember. She was silent for a moment, and I thought I'd finally reached her, but then she looked up with a look of pure annoyance. "Are you finished yet?" she snapped, leaving me speechless. Before I could move, she grabbed a box cutter from the desk and started tearing into the fabric. She was fast and methodical, her movements fueled by a terrifying amount of rage. By the time I could even reach for her, the dress was a pile of white scraps on the floor, destroyed beyond repair. She actually laughed then, pointing out that both the ring and the dress were gone now. She gave me a wicked smile and asked if that meant our pathetic excuse for an engagement could finally be over too. I just closed my eyes, feeling a wave of exhaustion so heavy I could barely breathe. I forced a tight smile and told her to get some rest, then walked out of the room. It was only then that the reality of her hatred truly sank in. I found Ryan Miller leaning against the wall in the hallway, watching me with a smug, lazy grin. My eyes were drawn to the scratches and marks on his neck, vivid reminders of exactly what had happened in my house last night. He looked at me like I was a punchline and told me to stop chasing things that weren't mine. Then, With a cruel laugh, he pulled out his phone and told me that since I was already having such a bad day, he might as well show me some entertainment. My hands were trembling as I took the device, and the images on the screen made my stomach turn. I couldn't even tell when they were from, but they were devastating. Ryan snatched the phone back and taunted me, offering to send me the files so I could watch them whenever I wanted. As he brushed past me, he leaned in and whispered a crude comment about her performance last night. He walked into the study and left me standing there, feeling like I'd been plunged into freezing water. Despite everything, Mr. Sterling pulled me aside at the venue and begged me to go through with the ceremony to save the family's reputation. He was terrified that another scandal would destroy Olivia's standing in Chicago society. I stayed quiet for a long time, but eventually I agreed because I still couldn't bear to see her dragged through the mud. To my surprise, Olivia didn't put up a fight and went along with the arrangements without a word. The whole thing was rushed, and we picked out a generic dress and rings just to get it over with. Standing in that perfectly decorated hall, I felt like I was watching a movie of someone else's life. It didn't feel like a celebration of love, just a cold, corporate transaction. I was already starting to regret my choice. We were staying in separate rooms, and I was stuck playing the happy host while the ballroom filled with guests. We were supposed to make our grand entrance together, but she was nowhere to be found. I tried to tell myself she was just nervous, but the minutes kept ticking by. The ceremony start time came and went, and the room started buzzing with gossip. I could see her parents across the room, their faces pale and tight with embarrassment. I tried to calm the guests while keeping my eyes glued to the door, telling myself she would never do this to me. That hope died the second her makeup artist came running into the hall, hysterical, screaming that Olivia had vanished. The room went dead silent. The girl explained through tears that Olivia had claimed she needed the restroom and just never came back. She had searched everywhere before coming to the hall. I could feel every eye in the room on me, and for the first time, I felt the stinging weight of their pity. I felt sick, but I managed to keep a fake smile plastered on my face for the guests. She'd been avoiding me for weeks, and I'd felt this coming deep down, but I'd been too much of a coward to face the truth. I just couldn't accept that the woman I knew would humiliate me this way. I'd sacrificed everything to protect her, and she hadn't given a single thought to my dignity. I gave the room a formal bow and told her mother we needed to find her immediately. I finally tracked her down in a secluded alleyway a few blocks from the hotel. She was wrapped in Ryan Miller's arms, the two of them whispering like teenagers. Her laugh was soft and melodic as she told him they were finally free to be together. He whispered something back that made her hide her face in his neck, giggling with pure joy. "I never lost my memory," she said, her voice clear as a bell. "I just wanted to mess with that idiot Lucas because I couldn't stand the thought of marrying him." A high-pitched ringing filled my ears, and I stood at the edge of the alley, my entire body shaking with a mix of shock and cold realization. Everything clicked. Why she remembered everyone but me, the coldness, the cruelty. It was all a calculated lie. Every excuse I'd made for her behavior was now just another twist of a knife she'd buried in my chest. A bitter laugh escaped my lips as the waves of anger and pain finally settled into a cold, hard certainty. It was over. I clenched my fists so hard my nails drew blood. I wasn't the only one watching. Her parents had followed me and seen the whole thing. Mrs. Sterling let out a horrified gasp, which finally made Olivia look up. For a split second, she looked guilty, but she quickly masked it with that same familiar sneer. "Oh, you're here," she said. "Good. It saves me the trouble of explaining." "Lucas, I'm not—" "Olivia, it's over," I said, cutting her off with a calmness that seemed to catch her off guard. Her eyes widened in genuine shock. She clearly hadn't expected me to be the one to pull the plug. She recovered quickly, though, twisting her face back into a smug, uncaring mask. "Trying to save face by dumping me first?" she mocked. "Just don't come crawling back when you realize what you've lost." I just looked at her and promised her that I would never, ever beg for her again. Mr. Sterling just stood there and hung his head, finally realizing there was no saving this mess. I moved out of the apartment the next day. The thought of staying in a place where they'd been together made my skin crawl. Olivia didn't waste any time, flooding her Facebook and Instagram with photos of her and Ryan, flaunting their relationship for the whole world to see. She'd always been a thrill seeker, I realized. I shook my head and went back to unpacking my new life. I came across an old photo album from our early days in that tiny apartment, and I found myself sitting on the floor, lost in the memories of who we used to be. I started remembering why I fell for her in the first place. My grandfather raised me, but after he passed away, I was suddenly swept up by the Montgomery family. They claimed I was the heir they'd been searching for years. I knew the reality was much darker. I was just the illegitimate son, a stain on the prestigious Montgomery name in a world that only cared about status. My siblings made it their mission to make my life a living hell, using me as their personal punching bag. Our first meeting was at a charity gala in Chicago. She was wearing a stunning white dress, the center of attention like a star in the night sky. She was the golden girl of the Sterling family, and I was just the unwanted stray hiding in the shadows of the ballroom. While the adults were busy networking, a group of boys dragged me into a service hallway. They threw me to the ground and started kicking me, one of them even grinding a shoe into my face while the others laughed. I honestly thought they might kill me right then and there. I was ready to give up, thinking that since my grandfather was gone, there was nobody left to care if I lived or died. I closed my eyes and waited for the next blow, but it never came. Instead, I heard a sharp, young voice demanding to know what was going on. The boys stopped instantly. Olivia was standing there, looking at them with pure authority, asking them if they were really stupid enough to start trouble in front of her. The Sterlings were too powerful for anyone to mess with, and those kids took off running the second she finished speaking. I looked up at her, bloody and terrified, as she turned those piercing eyes on me. She reached out her hand and told me to stop crying and get up. Her voice was stern, but when I took her hand, it was the warmest thing I'd ever felt. It was the first time anyone had ever shown me a shred of kindness, and I couldn't stop the tears from falling. I'm sure she's forgotten that day by now, and I never in a million years thought our story would end like this. I had to attend another social event a few weeks later, and I ended up going with a colleague named Maya. We were moving through the crowded ballroom, and she was being very attentive, keeping her hand on my arm as we chatted with the other guests. I was mid-conversation with a potential client when the sound of breaking glass cut through the music. I looked over and saw Olivia standing a few feet away, her hand on Ryan's arm. She was staring at me like she'd just seen a ghost. There was glass everywhere at her feet. Maya jumped at the sound, and I turned my attention to her, making sure she was okay and ignoring the scene Olivia was making. Suddenly, someone was blocking our path, and I looked up to find Olivia standing right in front of us. She looked pale, and she was glaring at Maya's hand on my arm like it was a crime. She demanded to know who she was. I just frowned at her and told her that my social life was none of her business anymore. She whispered my formal address back to me, looking momentarily confused by the distance in my voice. Maya was clearly uncomfortable, so I gave her a reassuring pat on the shoulder. Then I looked Olivia in the eye and told her she was bothering us and needed to move. She let out a sharp, mocking laugh and looked Maya over with pure judgment, commenting that my taste in women had clearly gone downhill. She smoothed out her expensive designer gown, as if she were a peacock showing off. I didn't blink as I told her, once again, to get out of our way. She looked genuinely shocked, as if she couldn't believe I was standing up to her. "How dare you speak to me that way, Lucas?" she hissed. My patience finally snapped, and I told her that she seemed to have a very short memory of how she'd treated me. I told her to stay away from me, because every time I saw her, I just hated her a little more. I took Maya's hand and walked right past her. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw her just standing there, frozen, while Ryan looked weirdly relieved. She didn't stay for the rest of the night. Later, when I was back at my apartment, my phone started buzzing with an unknown number. "Hello," I said, hearing loud music and chatter in the background. Then her voice came through, sounding just as entitled as ever, ordering me to come and get her. It was Olivia. I didn't even hesitate before telling her I was hanging up if she didn't have something important to say. "Don't you dare hang up on me, Lucas," she slurred, her voice heavy with alcohol. She started whining about having a headache and being too drunk to drive. I just told her to call Ryan and to stop calling my number. A stranger's voice suddenly came on the line, apologizing and saying that the girl was wasted and wouldn't stop calling me. I could hear Olivia in the background, screaming my name and struggling with whoever was holding the phone. It sounded like a mess. Then everything went quiet for a second, and she whispered into the receiver, asking me if I still loved her. She had to be out of her mind. I actually let out a dry laugh and told her that was impossible, and that seeing her made me sick to my stomach. The line went silent, and I could just hear her breathing before I finally ended the call. Word got around the Sterling circle that she hadn't spoken to Ryan in days. It didn't shock me. Olivia had a habit of discarding people the second they became inconvenient. Then she posted a photo on Facebook. She was sitting in a sunlit room with a massive smile. The caption simply saying "back together." I had no idea who she was talking about, but something about the room in the background of that picture felt hauntingly familiar. It took me a minute to realize it was the house we were supposed to live in after the wedding, the one I'd put on the market weeks ago. I couldn't understand why she'd buy it, unless she wanted to live there with Ryan. Later that night, in the middle of a massive storm, I heard a faint knocking at my door. I opened the door to find Olivia standing there, completely drenched and shivering in the cold. I froze when I saw what she was wearing. It was a wedding dress. It was the dress I'd made for her, the one she'd shredded with that box cutter. She'd somehow pieced it back together. I could see the messy, uneven stitches where she'd clearly tried to mend herself, each one a testament to hours of frustrating work. "Lucas," she croaked, her makeup running down her face in dark streaks. The untouchable Sterling heiress looked broken. She said my name again, her eyes filling with tears as she looked at my blank expression. She started sobbing, telling me how sorry she was for everything she'd done. She begged me for another chance, telling me she loved me and asking if I'd still marry her. I just stood there and watched her cry. I thought about the girl who'd lived in that tiny apartment with me, and I looked at the broken woman on my porch. But I felt nothing. Not even anger. It was in that moment that I realized my love for her had finally died. I sighed and handed her a towel. She looked hopeful for a split second, until I told her that she couldn't just throw me away and pick me back up whenever she felt like it. I told her the truth. I didn't love her anymore. All the color drained from her face, and she looked like she wanted to argue, but I just shut the door. We should have ended this a long time ago. She vanished for a few days after that. But Ryan Miller eventually reached out to me. He sounded terrible on the phone, asking to meet up. When I saw him at the coffee shop, I was shocked at how much he'd changed. The arrogant, handsome Ryan Miller was gone, replaced by a man who looked like he hadn't slept in a week. All his swagger had evaporated. He demanded to know what I'd done to make Olivia dump him. I didn't even look at him, just told him to take his questions to Olivia and to tell her to leave me alone. He was trembling with rage, but then he froze, looking past me. "Olivia," he whispered. I turned around and saw her standing there, her eyes swollen from crying. When our eyes met, she looked away. She asked me in a broken voice if Ryan was bothering me. I just stared at her and shook my head, feeling nothing but annoyance. She started stammering about how she would protect me if he was giving me trouble, but I wasn't interested. "I don't need your help," I said, cutting her off. "I just want both of you to stay the hell away from me." I could see the pain in her eyes, but I didn't care. As I stood up to walk away, she asked through her tears if I was truly done with her forever. I paused for a second, then kept walking without looking back. Silence was the only answer I had left for her. She started bombarding my phone with long, desperate messages every day, begging for forgiveness and swearing her love. I blocked her on everything, finally getting some peace. But then I heard from mutual friends that she'd done the unthinkable. She had officially cut ties with the Sterling family and given up her inheritance. This wasn't just some temporary argument. She was really gone. She walked away from the Sterling name, the money, and the life of luxury she'd known since she was a baby. She was truly on her own for the first time in her life. Her last message to me was a plea for a fresh start. I didn't even know what she was trying to prove. When I walked out of my office in downtown Chicago that evening, I saw her waiting by the entrance. She stood up as soon as she saw me, looking incredibly nervous. She was dressed in a simple, cheap white dress that the old Olivia wouldn't have even touched. It was a jarring transformation. I looked her over and asked her why she was there. She held out a lunchbox, looking at the ground, and asked if I'd eaten yet. She'd actually cooked for me. It was so out of character that it was almost comical. The Sterling Princess was playing housewife, and it felt like a bad joke. She looked at me with such desperate hope in her eyes. I took the box from her, and for a second, her face lit up. I walked over to the nearest trash can and dropped the food inside without a word. I told her to stop coming by and walked away. I had plans to meet a girl for dinner, a setup from a friend who thought I needed to get back out there after the wedding disaster. I finally gave in and went to the restaurant where I met Maya. She was petite and had this incredibly sweet energy about her. When she smiled at me with those bright eyes, I felt a genuine spark of warmth for the first time in months. "You must be Lucas," she said, her voice bright and full of life. We hit it off immediately, and she kept me laughing throughout the entire dinner. By the time we were done, I realized I was actually feeling lighthearted again. As we were saying goodbye, she slipped me a note and told me to give her a call if I wanted to see her again. I was still smiling as I put the note in my pocket, but the smile faded the second I saw Olivia standing across the street. She'd obviously seen me with Maya. Her face was wet with tears as she looked up at me. I told her she should go home, but she just stared at me and asked if I was going to marry that girl. I started to say it was too early to tell, but then I changed my mind and told her that, yeah, I probably would. She looked devastated and asked what she was supposed to do. I told her she had plenty of options, Ryan Miller or her parents. She started sobbing again, sounding like a heartbroken child, and kept telling me that I was the only one she wanted. I looked at the mess she'd become and just laughed. I told her that hearing her say that made my skin crawl. "I'd marry a stray dog before I ever considered marrying you again, Olivia," I said. It was like I'd finally broken her spirit, and the light just went out of her eyes. I didn't want to deal with it anymore, so I just walked away. I never saw her again after that night. The next time her name came up was on the local morning news. The reporter announced that Olivia Sterling had been found dead in her home, and they were treating it as a suicide. While the world was mourning her, I was starting my life with my new wife. Olivia's POV. I always knew Lucas was in love with me. It was so obvious from the way he looked at me and how nervous he got whenever I was around. I caught him staring at me 100 times. It was almost pathetic how much he adored me. I couldn't really understand what he saw in me, but I didn't mind the attention. He didn't have money or a name, but he was undeniably handsome, and I liked having him around to wait on me. It was a bit of an ego boost, to be honest. I was used to rich guys in suits buying me flowers and giving me the same boring lines, but Lucas was different. He was so nervous when he gave me that first letter that the paper was literally damp from his shaking hands. I thought it was cute, so I figured why not? When I said yes, he was so happy he was actually crying, spinning me around like we were in a movie. He promised me I'd never regret choosing him, and at the time, I didn't think I would. He treated me better than anyone ever had, including my parents. He worked himself to the bone, taking on extra jobs just so he could afford to buy me nice things. He was completely devoted to me. I told him he didn't have to, that I could buy whatever I wanted, but he was stubborn. He told me it was his job to take care of me, and then he'd get all emotional because he felt like he wasn't doing enough. He was such a dork. I knew I'd never find another guy who loved me that much, even though I wasn't really in love with him. When he wanted to start his own company after college, I figured I'd go along with it just to have something to do. I thought his dreams were a little naive, but I was bored enough to play the supportive girlfriend. Since I didn't have much to lose, I let my parents cut me off and moved into that tiny, cramped apartment with him. He was actually quite talented, and he worked harder than anyone I'd ever met. Every cent he made went toward making sure I had what I needed. He never spent anything on himself, which was just stupid. I eventually felt bad enough for him that I decided to get a job too, even though I felt like it was beneath me. I ended up working outside in the Chicago winter, and my hands were constantly raw and frozen. My perfect, manicured hands were a mess of cracks and sores. I hated it, but then I'd see the look of pure devotion on Lucas's face, and it almost felt worth it. Then Ryan Miller came back into my life, crying and telling me he was lost without me. He swore he still loved me. He was right. We were meant to be together before our families ruined everything. He was the one I truly loved. So I started seeing him behind Lucas's back, sneaking around whenever I could. Then I had the crash while I was on my way to see Ryan. The pain was unbearable, and when I finally woke up, the first thing I saw was Lucas's worried, exhausted face. I was done with him, but I was too much a coward to just end it. I came up with what I thought was a genius plan. I'd fake amnesia. I'd tell everyone I remembered everything except for him. Watching him break down was hard, and I did feel a little bad about it, but I needed an out. I told myself it was the only way to be with Ryan. I didn't understand why Ryan barely showed up at the hospital while Lucas never left my side, bringing me home-cooked meals and trying everything to make me smile. He stayed up all night just to make sure I was okay. The more he did, the more I hated myself, so I started lashing out at him, hoping he'd eventually just give up and leave. But he wouldn't. Ryan was the one who suggested the plan for the engagement party. I was supposed to go along with it and then just disappear at the last second, forcing Lucas to realize the truth so he'd finally let me go. It felt wrong, but I agreed to it anyway. I told myself it was the kindest way to end things. It worked. Lucas stopped coming around and finally left me alone. But when he actually said the words and ended the engagement, I didn't feel the relief I expected. I just felt panicked. Seeing him walk into that event with another woman on his arm was like a physical blow to my chest. I couldn't stop myself from confronting him, but he just told me he hated me. Watching him walk away made me feel like I'd lost everything. The pain was worse than anything I'd ever felt with Ryan. It finally hit me that I actually loved Lucas. Realizing it brought a strange sense of peace. I'd been in love with him for years and had just been too proud to admit it to myself. I convinced myself that since he'd loved me so much, he'd have to take me back. I spent nights painstakingly mending the dress he'd made for me, hoping it would be enough. But the answer was a cold, hard no. Even after I walked away from the sterling fortune to show him I was serious, he wouldn't even look at me. He told me I was disgusting and that he'd rather marry a dog than have me back. I couldn't understand how the man who had adored me could turn so cold. I didn't want to believe he was truly over me until I saw him looking at that other woman with the same love he used to have for me. He had that soft, tender smile on his face, and I finally realized that he was gone for good. I was the one who had thrown away the only person who ever truly loved me. Do not squander their patience while you still have them. For once the person who is willing to painstakingly mend your wedding dress decides to leave, he will never spare you another glance. Not even if you stand weeping in the pouring rain, clad in that tattered gown full of jagged stitches.